expect questions from you because the students are always the toughest. I think we lost Natalie?
It's not a question as much as it is, I saw Urban Community School up there, and I just want to say not only were you all there for us during that question, where our school is, literally from, we're down the street from where Tamir was shot, and when the protest was going to happen, they were going to be marching right past our school. We did not know it. And not only were you there for us in that moment, but you were also there for us when we were looking at curriculum and other things, because your budget is so much bigger than ours. And respond immediately, quickly, and put us in touch with people who can answer questions. And I'm indebted to you and that kind of leadership in what we try to do. So I just want to.
Thank you, Natalie. I appreciate it. You look small enough to know each other, but just in case you don't, Natalie is the middle school principal at Urban School that I talked about. Natalie is actually the person that reached out and created the opportunity for us to be in a role to serve. Natalie was the first reach on that, and then it was just a waterfall after that of people sharing, which is exactly what this is about. So that's really the beauty and the lesson out of that. All right, where are those tough questions? Yeah, I've got great wait time. I was a teacher. Yes, sir.
I'm from Philadelphia, which has a lot of dilemmas. I'm really impressed with it. You mentioned what happens with unions and big charter operators who want to get as many charters as possible and make revenue off of it. I don't know if those are issues here all.
Sure. So let me start with the charter school operators, and then I'll close that question with the union issue. So the charters, we're the Wild Wild West until literally last fall, where we finally passed legislation. Ohio has the largest presence of for-profit charter operators in the country. They have made millions and millions of dollars disservicing children, just to be absolutely candid. The new legislation does not prohibit for-profit charters, but it does now finally put quality standards in place for which if schools are not performing, they will be closed. And that has taken us years of fighting. Part of when we did our legislation, which is called the Cleveland Plan, which is only for Cleveland, we managed to get a carve-out that no matter what the rest of the state was going to do, we had to have quality for charters in Cleveland. And that fight came from our charter community, which was really controversial in this larger state context. We believe that that fight in 2012 actually set the stage for the fight that got the quality ratings now. We have not yet seen it effectively implemented. The law just went into place, and our State Department is trying to figure out how to implement it. And frankly, our State Department's charter director just resigned under a cloud of I'll leave it at that, for creating a system that kind of let people off the hook for their performance. And so it's still a really controversial issue for us here. And it was about how many kids you could get in seats at the cheapest cost and then turn the dollars over. And the single largest example of it was one for-profit provider who the school had to buy all of their assets from the provider, and then when he closed all the schools, the provider actually owned all of these state assets. They were no longer in the public domain, and so it was this clear question of what's really going on here. No kids getting served, and they have buildings that were bought by public dollars. They have resources, so it's really a tough issue that we're struggling through. For the teachers, for the unions, I have nine labor unions. We have gone through ups and downs. So when we first implemented the Cleveland Plan, one of the pieces of legislation says that I cannot undo bread and butter issues, but if it will get corrective action for our schools, I do not have to follow the letter of the law of books that were written over 40 years ago. And so I actually had, about 2 years ago, one of my unions running television ads with my phone number on it, telling all of Cleveland to call me and tell me why I wasn't fit for this job and why we shouldn't be doing that. That's actually one of my strongest supporting unions today. So we've come a long way with that union. They represent my secretaries, my food service workers, and my cleaners. And so, we were implementing new work rules about, like, food's got to be good for kids, the buildings have got to be clean, and you got to be nice to families. And I don't care what your book says, right? And so we had this big fight, which has now come to the point where they're really largely one of our biggest champions. Our teachers union, on the other hand, we are in contract negotiations right now. they were at the table when we wrote our plan. They went to, well, they weren't at it when we drafted the plan, but once it was public, we brought them to the table and said, look, make it better because we're going to get a plan. They went to Columbus with us, they lobbied with us. Our governor actually shared this in the debates, presidential debates recently. So that's where they were then. Now today, they have taken a vote of no confidence in my leadership. They got a 97% vote because unions can get these things. And it is because they're feeling the pain of reform and they're feeling a shift of where my strategy is to decentralize things back to the building level. And empower the people in the schools. That also makes it harder for unions to control because they could control 16 people at a central office, but they can't control 100 different leadership teams. My union president actually said to me one day, Eric, I don't think you realize that your principals have more power than you do. And I said, oh, I absolutely realize that. That was always the plan. They're the people who touch children. And so the labor environment is difficult. And we are also, just to be absolutely candid, we are in an anti-reform space. The country has fatigued of reform. And so the unions that had to move through reform, even 5 years ago, are now using rhetoric like reclaiming our promise, which is going back and getting the things they felt they've lost. And so I'm sure you're seeing that in Philadelphia as well. But what it has done is maybe slowed our progress, it hasn't stopped it. And in the end, our data has made the case. Our graduation rate, as just one example, has increased 14% since 2011. And that means, and that was my Fred talk this morning, that means 1,100 more children have graduated than would have in the system that we started with just 4 years ago. So I would just say that these are necessary challenges that we've got to persist through. That's a really long answer, I'm sorry about that. Hopefully it helped. And I told you it'd be unvarnished. Yes, in the back.
What are some of your future plans for integration of the charter and the public school continuing from here?
Yeah, so the question was, what are some future plans for the integration of charter and public schools? I think the one I'm most excited about right now is Stepstone Academy, which is a charter school that we, again, sponsor, and has just done some really remarkable things in one of our most depressed communities. They actually stole one of my principals to do it. She's a tremendous principal, so I'm not at all surprised she's finding success. But we actually are right now looking at how we can identify a school, one of our low-performing schools, and a faculty that is interested in their model, and actually doing a full immersion so that they can teach us their model and we can replicate it. And so we have opened a lot of new schools because frankly it's efficient to do that. You don't have to change a culture, but there is no evidence in this country that an urban reform strategy is going to work solely on opening new and closing old. You still have to deal with the schools you have. And so we're really excited about this opportunity to take a model that has shown it works with our children and find a faculty that, our faculty that is embracing of the model and give them just full access to how does it work, how do we do it, and watching that be incubated in one of our schools. So that's the example that I think is the one that most exciting for me. There's one question in the back and then another here, yes. For the teachers in the room, that's called airplane stacking.
You mentioned Tamir Rice and other things, and so I'm coming from San Francisco where we have a smaller population. We've gone from 25% to less than 4% African American, which makes it difficult to have the race conversation.
Yeah.
What do you do to address some of the issues of race, even within a classroom or with teachers, or just given what's going on across the nation?
Yeah, so I would say that the conversations around race and ethnicity are still something that I don't feel like I've done well enough. This is an area that I still struggle with. We are a majority-minority district. We're 86% minority, and largely that's African American and then Hispanic with a large Puerto Rican community. Our social emotional learning work has been our vehicle. Our social emotional learning work started in 2007 on my 10th day on the job. We had a young man go into one of our high schools, shoot 2 teachers, shoot 2 students, and then take his life. And we promised we would never stop talking about that, which is why I needed to say it again today. Most places want that stuff to go away. That was the birth of talking about social and emotional learning for children, which at the time no one really had heard of. It wasn't in vogue. It was that stuff. Now here we are 7 years later, and people are starting to think whole child again and are actually inquiring. And we've used that social and emotional learning, which really has 5 principles. It is knowing yourself, your self-awareness, and so for our youngest kids, we actually have feeling faces that you can show how you're feeling. Knowing how others are feeling, so I can see your feeling face, and if you have a blue card, I know you're not feeling well. If you have a yellow card, I know you are, right? And then understanding how we manage our feelings, and we manage that relationship with how others are feeling, and finally problem solving. So it's not actually a race question, but it gives us an access. And so one example that I would share with you, when we were preparing for the Brelo verdict, which actually came before the Tamir Rice verdict, and we were anticipating it literally being days before school let out, and so May is already rough in schools. And so we had 400 students in my student advisory, and when they walked in, we had photos from Baltimore on every table. And we just asked the question, first of all, what happened, and gave them a chance to talk about the rioting and everything. And then we asked the question, well, is this okay? Well, of course, kids know it's not okay, and so they would say, well, no, they shouldn't have broken the glass, they shouldn't have looted the building, they shouldn't, and so then we said, well, why did they? And really gave them a chance to process it, and then said, well, did it matter? I mean, did you answer differently if you're a white woman or a black man? Because the answer is clearly yes. Absolutely, you answer differently. And so gave kids a chance to talk about it. And I think, the response in Cleveland compared to the response in Baltimore are very, very different. I would say that part of that is because we are trying to have these conversations with our kids, and I don't think we're doing them very well. Very candidly, I wish we were doing them a lot better, but at least we're trying, and I think that's what you've got to do. You've got to start those conversations. And then, when we were in the Brelo materials that we sent out to the schools, I mean, we actually had our schools talking with our kids about how they would be heard. And I think that's a big part of it, is you have to have a philosophical point of view that our kids deserve to be heard. And I think what happened in Baltimore, again, I'm saying this from an outsider's point of view, but it seemed to me that there was kind of this belief that the kids should be quiet and let the adults handle this. And I actually wanted our kids to be heard, and so we had schools that were prepared for kids to go and have sit-ins in the gym. We told schools that kids could picket. They couldn't have a picket stick, but they could picket. They could carry signs. We had one school that had planned that they were all going to call City Hall and jam up the phone lines, and that was going to be their civil disobedience. And so kids didn't have to resort to being heard in the streets because they had a place to be heard. And then I think the last thing I would say about it is we have to presume that life is going to be well, and that kids are going to do right. And so the Brelo verdict actually happened on a Saturday. And we had events all over the city on a Saturday. It was graduations, and it was proms, and we didn't cancel a single thing. We messaged very clearly that, business as usual, and we'll be ready if anything happens, but there are 39,000 kids doing exactly what we expect every day, and we're not taking things away from them. We're not letting a community take the few things my kids have away from them. And so I think where we've done right in our race and equity conversations is about a philosophical point of view about what every human being deserves, and making sure that is privileged, voice and access and participation. I think where we still struggle is, I think it's still really hard for people to do what McKenna did and stand up and say, and having a white privilege actually matters, or to do what Malik did and say, as a black male, I do face prejudice and I have a different way of facing it now. We would hope there's a lot of people out there, Trump's in town today, there's a lot of people out there that would hope we would have Malik saying, oh, there's no such thing, and it's a lie, right? And we're still having trouble having that level of a candid conversation in Cleveland. But I guess the last thing I would say, and you can tell I really care about this, Cleveland's hurting publicly. We're really proud of the city, and you will see CLE everywhere. We're really proud of the city. We're hurting publicly, but we're not the only one hurting. Our laundry's just on the street, and I hope every city is asking these questions and not waiting for their Tamir. I hope that there aren't cities that are taking advantage of not having the Brelo issue so that they don't have to have these conversations. That one if there's any good that can come of this, is that at least our city's trying to talk about it, and we've got to make the best of what we have. So, thanks, that was a great question. Yes, sir.
I'm from Honolulu, Hawaii. My question is about the voucher system and how do you respond to critics about the potential negative effects on the schools in general.
So the question was the voucher system, and I'm going to actually add into it the charter system. So here I've become friends with the enemies, and doesn't that erode all of the charter schools? Kind of I'm paraphrasing, but that's kind of the question, right? So here's the answer. My enrollment has been plummeting for decades. We've lost 20,000 kids in the last 20 years. Last year we increased for the first time in 2 decades by 455 kids, and this year we're up another 900 kids. It turns out when we work together, we all get better. And so, my answer to the critics is, well, I could continue to fight everybody and lose kids, because that's what had happened. There was a free fall, or I could actually change the dialogue. And this truly, for me, it maybe sounds really simple. All I intended to do was change the conversation. And in changing that conversation, for the first time in over 20 years, more families are choosing my district, not less. And so I think the evidence, at least anecdotally, because that's only one data point, but at least the first bit of evidence is saying that a changed dialogue is resulting in a changed experience. That's how I would answer. Yes, ma'am. And someone's going to have to tell me when I got to stop talking, because I can do this all day. So. Oh, okay. I'm getting the hook.
So I'm coming from Washington, D.C.
Great.
And my question is, how do you train your principals and they in turn your teachers around equity and inclusion, and how are you holding them accountable to actually have those conversations?
Yeah, so this is, again, the question about how we're training our principals and our teachers around equity and inclusion and how holding them accountable. Again, and I'm not going to spend a lot more time on it, we've really done it largely through our social emotional learning work. Now, how are we holding them accountable for it? We actually measure SEL 3 times a year. We have on our dashboard of metrics, we have, we call it the conditions for learning in our schools, and it looks at social emotional capacity, it looks at challenge, it looks at academic safety, so whether these young people would ask questions in our classroom and feel brave to say the things said or not, and then it looks at levels of support. We actually award building-based compensation stipends based on achieving goals in our conditions for learning. We've embedded in our contract requirements about implementation of social emotional learning. So how we're holding them accountable, and it's also embedded in our teacher evaluation. So how we're holding them accountable, I think we're a lot stronger. I think the direct laser focus on race and equity, we've taken, I would say, a less direct way using social emotional learning, and so where we would need to strengthen it is taking that same scaffold, that same shell that's in place, and just being a lot more intentional in the race conversations. And I think that's where we're trying to move right now. I know that's where we're trying to move right now. So, do we have one last question? You got it, it's yours.
It's 9. I got about 5 in 1. So I'm really excited that you're closing out this, because you have really presented us with what you have to offer us as private schools.
Great, thank you.
And I think that we need to find more ways to have those conversations where we are sharing and collaborating. So one of the things, and piggybacking on what other people are saying, is wouldn't it be a wonderful opportunity for us to collaborate and learn, talk about developing skills as we watch the demographics of the students that we are teaching changing.
That's right.
And how are we making sure that what can we learn from you and what you're doing and what can you learn from us in order to make sure that our underrepresented groups are being serviced?
Yeah, so I think this is a really an open opportunity, right? And so one of the things that we've done, and it was a real pain point for my pedagogy and curriculum people, is we have made any training that we're providing in the district free and open to any of our partners, as long as it doesn't cost us more to deliver. And frankly, our public district partners have taken more access of it. So we have a district right outside of Cleveland that is 800 students, so they don't have any kind of infrastructure capacity, but it is as poor of a community as mine, and it is 100% Black, African American. And so they're struggling with the same issues we are. All of their teachers, they've now built their calendars so that all of their teachers take their professional time and come into the district and work with my faculty. And so I think there's some real opportunities in your communities to think about, okay, so if your demographics are beginning to change, and to me, it's even, in this case, it's less about the demographic change and it's more about the readiness that was the impact of poverty and race structures and class structures. So I don't think you have to wait for it to be, do I have more African American or Hispanic kids? But if you're seeing that the impacts of, we're unfortunately the single highest childhood poverty in the country. Even Detroit is behind us now. And the impacts of poverty in what students had access to drives by demand how we respond differently. I think you can join those faculty and learn from them, and they learn from you. And so that actually brings us to where we started, a Philip Exeter kind of strategy, where you're bringing your knowledge to the table about what rich, rigorous instruction really should look like for all kids, but then sitting with somebody saying, I really appreciate that, but my kids don't have some basic skills. And so how do I get those basic skills into them in a not drill kill way, and so that I can do what you're saying to do? I would say reach out to your local districts and hope that they would provide the same kind of access that we're trying to do here in Cleveland. And if you're from Cleveland, call us, because truly, anything we do, as long as it doesn't cost, have impact on our bottom line, because I have a responsibility to my taxpayers, it's free. If it does, then we just say to the district, can you have them pitch 25 bucks in for the materials we're going to produce so that they can take them with them. So that's how I would tackle it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Eric. So just for the last 30 minutes that we have together, we want to just talk about next year and wrap some things up. So I'm actually going to bring up Carl Ackerman and Barbara G. Are you coming? I think you're coming. Okay.
Before Carl, I am the head of school, so I get to interrupt things every once in a while. So before Carl and Barbara come up, I wanted to express my deepest gratitude to Camille. She has done such an incredible job with this conference. And her leadership, which we see exhibited here at HP every single day, and not only during the school year, but during the summer as well with Aspire. She has brought forth, I think, a phenomenal experience for all of us. So, and to use a word that Delaney used, magical. I think it has been a magical 3 days, and it's because of you, Camille. So thank you so very, very much for everything.
Barbara and I are going to be very brief, no longer than 5 minutes, so it'll be shorter than the 6 minutes at the very beginning of the day. And those guys were wonderful. I especially like the first one about the hokulea. But I'm a guy from Hawaii. So anyway, we're going to say, I'm going to talk about one person and give this person an award. It's called the Director's Award. And in this speech, I'll be thanking certain people who have really helped PSPP over the years. But I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge David Cutler. David, could you stand? David Cutler has written about our movement in the Atlantic monthly, so big time. And he's not done it once, but he's now coming out with another national article which will include private-public partnerships. And David, we're very grateful to you. You didn't have to do this, and you did it, and I know that you teach besides doing this. So we're particularly grateful. We are about to give an award. The PSPP Director's Award is given to an individual in our private public school educational world who has demonstrated 10 years or more of steadfast commitment to private-public partnerships and to creating an even playing field for all students. This award is given annually by the PSPP directors at the National Symposium and Conference. I want to address first our superintendent who's here today. In Hawaii, we don't talk about the superintendent. Even us at private schools, we talk about our superintendent. Thank you for coming to this PSPP. I told Kathy Matayoshi that you were coming, but I couldn't get her to fly all the way because it takes like a day and a half. And she's in the middle of doing a lot of things with our legislature, so I'm sorry she couldn't come. This year the award goes to H. William Christ. This award, the Director's Award, is given to you. While one can talk about your leadership at Hathaway Brown for days, as your prowess as the 13th head of school at HB has allowed the faculty to double, a magnificent expansion of the school resources, and a heartfelt dedication to the educational motto of your school, non scholae sed vitae decimus, if my Latin is still good, not for school but for life. Today we celebrate you for your steadfast commitment and support for the creation and nurturing since its opening in 2002 of the Aspire program. Under your leadership, Cami Dubey and Koyen Parek Shah began to investigate the program's potential impact on the greater Cleveland schools. Cami, are you here? I know you were here earlier. Could you stand? And Ms. Shaw, could you stand? Where are you? I hope you're still here. There she is. This is Aspire. It's the beginning. The Aspire program enabled you to connect the resources of this school with a broader range of Cleveland's brightest young women, including girls who come from low-income families or have had limited exposure to higher education. Your Aspire program is a tuition-free academic leadership program that connects the splendid resources of Hathaway Brown with public school students across the Cleveland public school system. This Aspire program has graduated hundreds of young women, many of whom have matriculated on to college and are fulfilling the educational promise of the program. Perhaps Aspire has come full circle now under the splendid leadership of Camille Seals, herself a Hathaway Brown graduate. Of course, one would be remiss if one did not mention that this 9th convocation of PSPP is largely the result of the work of Mrs. Seals and her committee. But I'm not going to stop there, because I'm a historian, and so I go back just, farther than, I should say further than 10 or 20 years. Camille's parents are here. Could you please stand? You're the original origin of the creation. Now, Camille, is your brother still here?
No, he had rich additions today.
He's also responsible for Camille, too. So there we go. H. William Christ, in an interview with you last fall, you mentioned to me that the Aspire program was created because you at Hathaway Brown were summoned to do this. I like those biblical words. And a bit later, you said Aspire fit into your overall vision of HB being a transformative institution. Bill, the depth of your feelings for Aspire came out during one of your parting comments to me during this interview. It must have been your afternoon, because it was certainly early in Hawaii when we interviewed you. You said, if not for the Aspire program at Hathaway Brown, we would be failing in our mission. We would be failing in our mission here at this private school. That's unbelievable. You're a real mensch. In your convocation speech for the 2015-2016 academic year, you quoted Luke 12:48. To those to whom much is given, much is expected. This is a principle that you have incorporated in your overall vision for Hathaway Brown. You also discussed in this speech to the young women of Hathaway Brown the year's theme, lighting the way, leaving your legacy. See, you gotta be careful on what you put on your website, right? The first part of this theme, lighting the way, reminds me of a passage from your beloved William Shakespeare. And isn't it wonderful that you share the name William? When Portia in The Merchant of Venice says, how far that little candle throws his beam. And the second part of your theme, leaving your legacy, seems akin to a line from Ophelia in Hamlet. Lord, we know what we are, but we do not know what we may be. You, H. William Christ, scholar and teacher of Shakespeare, head of Hathaway Brown School, have lived this theme all your life. You light our way with your devotion to the Cleveland public school system, and the Aspire program is certainly part of your legacy, and a critical part of that legacy. All of us at PSPP Cleveland honor you with this Director's Award. This came all the way from Hawaii in a suitcase. Please. You know, in that interview that took place last fall, Bill, I asked about his hobbies. You know, he didn't know why I was interviewing him, and this is a surprise to him today. But he said he enjoyed baseball, and I'm going to let Camille come on up here and you guys say what he has in that little package. If that's a little.
So, in your bag is a treat for you that you'll remember. And we were able to get you 4 tickets to a Cleveland Indians game of your choice, and you can go early to watch batting practice.
And that's not all, you can't go. And because of your taste in red and white, you will find that also in the package. So, again, a longtime supporter of private schools and public purpose, H. William Christ. You can go down.
That was really, really wonderful, and I'm so grateful to you for all your kindness, and thanks to all of you as well. But we all know that this is really all about going in and camping. So I'm just happy to be part of their project, and I'm so thrilled with what they created, and that is a legacy which is going to go along. And I just also want to thank Eric too, because that was a great speech. You call this room and this community, you get 100% vote of confidence. Thank you so much.
Yes, I'm going to ask a representative from Washington, D.C., who's planning this all, to come on up now, just to say a few words about next year's PSPP in March. Mark it on your calendar. She didn't know I was going to call on her, of course. Oh, you did? Okay. You know, I have 2 daughters. I have very something to say, but please.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katherine Pearson from Georgetown Day School in Washington, D.C. And I'd first just like to thank Carl and Barbara, Camille, everyone here at HB for welcoming us to your school, to sharing your space with us, for feeding us delicious food for the past 2 days. Next year, GDS is thrilled and honored to host the 10th PSPP. So the conference will begin on March 9th, conclude on March 11th. And so we hope that you will join us in our nation's capital. We are already brainstorming lots of wonderful things that we're going to include in next year's conference. And so please, we hope that we'll be able to see all of you there from near and far. Please join us in DC for PSPP 2017. Thank you.
We will be there, Catherine. So just very quickly, as with the Spire tradition, we'd like to give Carl and Barbara some Spire t-shirts and a bracelet that we tell the girls to wear and remind them of Aspire even when they're not with us.